Abraham Lincoln and the bleakest day in American history. The bleakest day in American history may have been April 15th, 1861. On this day, President Abraham Lincoln made a proclamation that was penned in direct response to the attack on and surrender of Fort Sumter. Although the presidential proclamation of April 15, 1861 is not considered one of the most revered or well-written of Lincoln's writings, it is very important to study. This document expresses Lincoln's willingness to put aside his personal ideology to do what he considered essential to preserve the Union. In this case, preserving the Union meant raising a military force to end the Confederate rebellion. This proclamation showcases the President's ability to address the specific details of a given situation to accomplish a task, despite his personal feelings. Prior to the assault on Fort Sumter, Abraham Lincoln had made an ardent effort to prevent an action like this from occurring. Prior to his election in 1860 to the presidency as the Republican nominee, he made mention on many occasions, publicly and privately, that his intention was not to dismantle slavery. He also explained to Republicans, Whigs, and Democrats that if elected, he would not allow the widespread conversation of secession to actually come to fruition. Talk of secession had been an issue for well over a decade, and the most recent resolution had been the Compromise of 1850, written by Henry Clay. This document restructured the entry of the new states and territories, established a means of determining slave and free areas, and established a border between Texas and New Mexico. Despite the compromise, secessionist talk continued, and Lincoln's election remained a contingent point and focus of secessionists. Abraham Lincoln spent the time between his election in November 1860 and his inauguration in March 1861 trying to maintain the unity of the Republican Party while working with Whigs and Democrats to preserve the Union. He never accepted the state's right to secession and worked tirelessly to keep relations with Southern Unionists. Despite his best efforts over this period of time, South Carolina became the first to secede from the Union on December 20, 1860. Less than a week later, Union Major Robert Anderson moved his unit from Fort Moultrie near Charleston Harbor to Fort Sumter located in the harbor. This move turned the heads of many, and a month after the president's inauguration, their presence in Fort Sumter was seen as an enemy invader in their territory. Confederate General P.G.T. Beauregard began communication with Major Anderson, demanding a surrender, which was initially denied. This resulted in the Confederate artillery firing upon the fort for 1.5 days. Eventually, the fort was surrendered by the Union to the Confederacy on April 14, 1861. President Abraham Lincoln began his introduction of the Presidential Proclamation of April 15, 1861, by addressing the issue at hand, the secession of states from the Union, and were acting in open hostility toward the Union fort. The President initially addresses South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, Florida, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Texas as states, still considering them a part of the Union, which had acted in a manner that surpassed the means of law. He stated in his official capacity as the President of the United States, and using his interpretation of the Constitution of the United States, that the mustering of a militia of 75,000 men was required in order to suppress the actions of the aforementioned states and to compel them to follow the laws of the Constitution. President Lincoln was using this proclamation in an attempt to spur recruitment and raise an army in a short amount of time to retake Fort Sumter and also to defend Washington, D.C. It is now known that he was successful in increasing recruitment in the northern states, with recruitment station lines forming immediately. However, in the border states, the inspiration to enlist was not as well received. Next, the President Lincoln gave instruction to the states and the citizens, as well as outlining his intentions. He stated that the military force being raised was to initially recapture and reclaim the forts, places, and property which had been seized from the Union. He informed the people that the intention of the force being called up was not to harm the lawful citizens. However, he directly asserts his authority by commanding the unlawful citizens to put down their weapons and end their aggression, and to peaceably return home within 20 days. It seems that Lincoln's tone when appealing to the lawful citizens is less of an appeal and more of a reprimand to the unlawful citizens. In the same portion of the text, in reference to the assault on Fort Sumter, it suggests that this army is not simply for retaking a fort, but for much more. I appeal to all loyal citizens to favor, facilitate, and aid this effort to maintain the honor, the integrity, and existence of our national union and the perpetuity of popular government, and to redress wrongs already long enough endured. He would fight to restore the Union at all costs. It is clear that President Lincoln was conflicted about the idea of war when he stated the purpose of calling the force will probably be to repossess the fort's places and property. Although he is making a direct statement to the secessionists that further bloodshed is in the future, and the fact that he had spent time in the militia as a private and as a captain, it does not seem to send a strong message of military action. The use of the word probably most likely expresses his hesitation and personal resistance to declaring war against his own country. The President's proclamation goes on to address the Congress. He called the elected officials, including senators and representatives, to a special session at noon on July the 4th. The purpose, Lincoln stated, for the session is to consider and determine such measures as, in their wisdom, the public safety and interest may seem to demand. The message is clear that the chosen date of July the 4th was harking back to the signing of the Declaration of Independence, a nostalgic reference to a unified country. An unexpected outcome of the proclamation was that Virginia seceded just 2 days later, on April 17, 1861. Virginia's secession had unintended consequences when considering the fact that President Lincoln had requested Robert E. Lee to command the Union forces that had been mustered through the proclamation, only to be denied by Lee due to his loyalty to Virginia. President Lincoln's goal was to squash the rebellion, not further the divide. President Abraham Lincoln was clearly a man of conviction. He tried to exhaust all means of restoring the Union available. Prior to loss of Fort Sumter, short of physical force, he attempted to use the Congress, politics, interpersonal relationships, and other forms of political negotiations. Despite his best efforts and his individual moral and beliefs, he chose to write this proclamation. This proclamation may have led to the bleakest day in American history, because it was the day that the Commander-in-Chief chose to raise an army of Americans to fight against an army of Americans.